Solidarity podcast. I have a guest with us today. Today we will be talking to Casey. Casey is a diversity, equity, and inclusion coach, and I have been looking forward to this connection because, of course, their vision, values, and goals align with the Solidarity&Co vision, values, and goals. So I thought, hey, why not introduce you all to Casey? Without further ado, hi, Casey.
Hey, Mo, and everybody listening.
Hello, listeners as well. Yes. So thank you so much for joining me today. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do at Beyond Thinking?
Uh, so I do a lot of coaching, facilitation, and some training as well. Mostly in the anti-racism, DEI, spaces. But I've been doing the work for close to 20 years, and I've just had the privilege of getting to learn so much and do amazing things with amazing human beings. And but I had been working in institutions, and as I'm sure everyone knows, when you're in an institution, the work always hits a ceiling. And so I decided to go out on my own and work with folks interested in leaning into the work in a deeper and more meaningful way.
Yes, I recognize that. And so that leads me actually into my first question for you. So I kind of wanted to ask, what were you doing before you started Beyond Thinking? Could you tell us a little bit more about that work? Because I already know that you were doing some great things.
So for about 12 years, I worked for the city of Seattle. And I was in emergency management doing community engagement. And I was awesome. I loved getting to be in community and working with communities that traditionally weren't being engaged by the government. And I mean, more than anything, I learned a lot. Uh, and did a lot of just resource connecting, and it was just great. It was a great job. But emergency management falls under the police department in Seattle, and so I got a call from headquarters one day that was like, "You're a trainer. You work with different people. You're going to train our officers in anti-profiling." Uh, so I panicked. Full well knowing I was woefully ill-equipped for such a task. Um, and my boss was like, "I think it's a great idea." And I was like, oh, panic. So I took every community course I could take. I took every training that I could. I was like meeting up with people who I knew were engaged in like varying levels of doing that kind of like organizing, movement building, community work. And then I met with somebody from the Office for Civil Rights who later became my mentor. And she was like, have you ever complained about policing? Maybe. And she's like, cool. People have been banging on this door for a few hundred years, and you just got an open invitation to walk through. Are you really not going to take it? So I like to consider that the greatest call-in of my life. And I was like, okay, here we go. And so I did that for 3 years, both training officers on anti-profiling, as well as like reviewing police policy for where bias might exist. And from that, my career just changed. So then I started, I was involved in the Race and Social Justice Initiative for the city of Seattle for over 10 years, and actually finished my time at the city working in the Office for Civil Rights, overseeing their training and education program.
Wow, so this is not a job interview at all, right? But I feel like you have this incredible resume, this incredible background that really makes sense to why you are currently coaching through your own platform. And so a lot of that that you were just saying about like coaching police officers, reviewing policy for biased and or for bias. And then also like working in the civil rights department, working in racial justice environments. When I tell you that is such a breath of fresh air to
Mm.
hear from someone who is non-Black, um, I just want to commend you on doing that work. I can imagine how tough it was. And then also commend you on doing what you are doing now, because I
Yeah.
know that some of our listeners have worked with coaches or have been in diversity, equity, and inclusion spaces, right? And we're all learning, and you kind of
Mhm.
help people to learn more. So
Hopefully.
kudos.
Hopefully. And it's so interesting because I've been so fortunate to be surrounded by brilliant and amazing, mostly women, like Black and brown women, who have invested an incredible amount of energy and labor into my learning, right? And so I think one of the things that I think about all the time is like part of my job is honoring the gift that was provided to me, um, and recognizing the fact that, I was not born, I mean, I was born without bias, uh, but I didn't get to adulthood without absorbing a lot. And, I feel so privileged that I was taken under multiple wings to kind of help me reflect, help me to excavate, help me to reality test and perception test ideas, thoughts, beliefs that I have kind of absorbed throughout time. And I recognize that like that's labor I want to put into folks too. And I have heard pretty consistently for folks that us white people are pretty tiresome,
I don't
and
feel that. I don't feel that at all.
and that's okay. Like I get that, right? Like I get it. Like that's okay. And so what I like to do is be the person be like, send me your white people. Just send me your white people. If you don't want to answer that question, if you're tired of it, send me your white people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that reminds me of a poem that I wrote. It was called Say More, but in that poem, I talk about how if you say it, literally the line is, if you say it and it sounds true, someone may listen to you. And so that just emphasizes it, right? It was a very like Dr. Seuss poem about speaking up for racial justice. And it was one of the first poems that I ever shared in the creative community here. So yeah, I love that full circle moment. Casey, next I wanted to ask you about right the new state. Like, what are you doing now, and how can people connect with you now? You just said, "Send me your white people." They said that, not me. Okay,
That's right.
and
That's right.
so, how do we connect with you now?
Yeah. So I both have a very long website because you'll understand why in just a second. But it's www.beyondthinkingwithcasey.com. And it's beyond thinking because I feel like we are at this challenge point where for folks, no matter what dimension of diversity folks are struggling with or have like maybe unconscious bias around, uh, we have to get past the intellectualizing. We have to get past the like intellectual understanding and more into the embodiment, right? Like move it past that. Let it live in you. Like there are so many people who can answer more trivia than I can. I mean, hands down on every topic. But but I think about how in practice, like I feel pretty confident about the way that I show up to the work, right? And so I think that that's it. Is like I want to get folks past thinking or understanding in the intellectual sense into the embodiment, so that when like you see violence on the TV or you see violence in the news or you see rhetoric or coded talk or whatever, that you feel activated and impacted to step in, to lean in. and to operate in solidarity with folks so that it's not always on the folks who are being harmed to speak up.
Wow. That's the clip. That's the clip that I will share to promote this episode. And you guys are hearing the inside behind the scenes scoop right now. That's it, right? Getting past just thinking and embodying it. And so that really attaches to my kind of candid way of saying it, right? Is about owning it. Own it. If you are feeling this way, if you feel like there's wrong, own it and activate. And so I think that's really what advocacy is in a nutshell.
Yep.
I own that. Yeah, I can see the wrongs in things. And instead of just sitting by idly, scrolling on my feed, right? I chose to do something. And I love what you're doing, Casey. So I'm super glad to have you today. Thank you for that amazing clip.
Well, Emma, thank you so much. I feel like you are lifting up the voices of many, and like in also like sharing that both platform, but like the investment of love and the interconnectedness of it all. And I just really appreciate you taking a risk to launch Solidarity, and also like lean in a hard way that honors your truth, and also demonstrates how we are interconnected, how liberation, how solidarity, like they're interconnected. No one's free till we all are, right? Like that's been a
Yes.
phrase for a long time. It's still true.
Fannie Lou Hamer. Shout out to
Thank
the great
you.
Southern
Yeah.
activist, Fannie Lou Hamer. And so, with that being said, right, when we are doing this work and coming from an underprivileged Black community, I understand, right, the obstacles that we have to overcome, the adversity that we face. And it almost seems compounding when you look at the trajectory of someone's life, right, from maybe even as a queer person, from the time that you come out to the time that like you are now existing in this world. And really once I started to learn more, I realized what those obstacles were. And so could you share with us like some of the things that you had to overcome to being who you are now and embracing what you do?
Mhm. Uh, yeah, I will try to be as succinct as I can. Um, I mean, I grew up in kind of a smaller town, very white, but in a household. I mean, granted, this is like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? So, like, there was so much stigma around so many things.
Mhm.
Not that there's not now, but like, uh, I was growing up in a household with a parent who had a lot of mental health stuff going on. And because it was so stigmatized, like they got diagnoses, but they wouldn't take treatment, right? Because they didn't want to be seen as, I don't, X, uh, which meant that we had a really volatile home. And I got kicked out of my house when I was 17, and not for being a queer beau. I got kicked out because I got accepted to college. And according to my parent who suffered with mental health, um, I was too stupid and not worth anything other than being of service to them. Like that was it. So like those were the messages I was absorbing. I also grew up very Catholic. A lot of messages were getting absorbed there. Like I really wanted to be an altar boy and I couldn't understand why I couldn't. Right. And so just a lot of these messages that were like, you're not good enough. You're not worth much. Uh, and nobody likes you. And so when I got kicked out because I wasn't supposed to apply to college. So when I did, uh, I came home from work and my mom had gotten the mail and was like, oh, what is this? Chaos ensued. And I knew in that moment, I was like, this is it. This is my out. Like, this is my out. So I hustled and I worked so many jobs. I mean, always three at a time, right? Like always three at a time, sleeping in my car, couch surfing, um, crashing on the theater department's couch. Thanks for that.
Shout out to them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you know, I just like I knew that that was the only way, that I wasn't going to like stay in a volatile, violent home. Um, but of course, I didn't escape unscathed, right? I was very angry. I was very traumatized. And my anger presented in the self of like my defense mechanism was like, ha, ha, ha. Are you going to try to see me? I'm going to like Achilles heel cut you with like some sort of a, what I think might be your insecurity. So I also caused a lot of harm, even through my own like traumatized survival period.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that occurred was like, I just didn't understand anything really at that time period. And it wasn't until later, like I still think I had that hustle survivalist mentality, still very defensive and terrified, just so terrified. I had a parent who tried to kill me on more than a few occasions. And it just was like scary. And so, I mean, I'll tell you, it's not like I entered this field with grace and ease. You know, after I got told, like, you're going to go do this, go train officers, one of the trainings I took was where they were like, you know, everybody has bias. We all agree, right? And then there's like, and if you add societal privilege to it, right? Like, and so like their thing was like, well, if everybody has bias and if white folks have societal privileges, doesn't that equate to all white folks being racist? So I was like, what? Right? Because I grew up in the time period. I mean, like, I don't want to act like I have things figured out even now, but I definitely didn't then. And I was defensive. I was so defensive. And was just like, my life was hard and blah, blah, blah. You know, I mean, I'm sure you and your listeners have heard this before, right? Probably many times.
A million.
And I went dancing that night, like partner dancing with somebody who I thought was cute. And they were like, how's your day? And I was like, let me tell you about my day, right? Because I was like seeking out white solidarity in assurance that I was a good white person. And they turned around and they were like, yeah, that's right. And like, I was like, huh. And then I had to be like, why am I hearing it why can't I hear it from this person and not from those two BIPOC folks who were leading the course, right? Like who were leading that training. And that just like, that was I think the first real like deep reflection I started to do. And for any of my fellow white people who are listening, I just want to say, like, if you are activated, if you are like trying to figure out what to do, reflection is one of the best things we can do. It's one of the best and most important actions we do. And it's so frequently overlooked. And so, you know, that was the beginning of my reflection. And I was just really lucky because I think the recipe for like my awakening, if you will, which I just want to be clear that I do not feel awake. I feel like I'm still like the sleepy eyes trying to like figure things out. Stuff is still fuzzy because I'm still learning, but I'm still leaning in, right? Like I want to be real clear about that. But it was like this moment of like, oh, I have seen nothing. And then I bought this book that was called Lies My Teacher Told Me. And it like, I was like, oh my God, like I was learning to pass tests. I wasn't learning about reality. And so that was a big part of it. But I had this great recipe, right? Like had an actively violent parent. And I know that seems like not a gift, but I think what it did was, I would hear people when I was in a training being like, this feels unsafe. And I was like, I feel incredibly safe. Yeah, it's hard. This is hard conversation. It's forcing me to feel uncomfortable, but I'm definitely safe. And so I think that was such a gift because it helped me to kind of being like, well, yeah, this is a hard talk, but I don't feel unsafe. And so that never showed up.
Yeah.
And I just was lucky, right? Like I was going through a really intensive 3-year program that was like unpacking racism, as well as like part of a capacity building movement that was also intended to kind of like get you to a place that then you were mentoring people and pulling people in and lifting folks up. It was very incredible. Yeah. So I had that. I was helping to run an all ages poetry slam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, poetry.
Yeah. And I was mostly an MC, like, because turns out I can write a good story, but I'm not a poet, not a very good one. And so I was like, how about I MC? And, I think I had the right combination of art and community and like intensive space where I was learning and doing the work, right? Like it wasn't just like, you can read this article. Mm-hmm. It was like, great, you're going to read that article, then we're going to have a mixed race conversation about it. And then you're going to go and bring it back to your workplace. And we're going to ask your bosses to let us know what they learned.
Wow.
Right.
Like, intense. I asked you about your obstacles and struggles and things of that nature because I really have an affinity for everyone learning at this stage, where you kind of identify, right? I want to be in solidarity. I believe that we all can work together towards this common goal of changing these systems of oppression. And next, you have to get into doing the work, right? But we've all experienced obstacles and had hurdles to jump over to getting to where we are. So many things that you were saying really impacted me, just from the experience that you had growing up, the acceptance into college, even though you weren't supposed to apply. And I recently watched a TED Talk where a lady was discussing, I forget her name, but she is highly reputable. And she was discussing how a lot of things that she wasn't supposed to be. She wasn't meant to be, right? But because of luck, because of the interconnectedness, because of people who were uplifting her, she, as a BIPOC woman, past all of the bars and expectations that people had set for her or that she even deemed possible for herself. And so, Casey, not only do I want to embrace your obstacles that you've had to overcome to get where you are, I think it also helps us to learn a little bit more about how we can learn from you, right? Because I think people assume that non-Black people don't always have the same lived experience. But what I've learned through solidarity is that we all have our struggles. And so when we find out what each other has gone through, then you can find that source of humanity, right? Or you can identify the intersectionality, and there you find a bit of connectedness. And so ideally, I want to talk to you about the intersectionality of it all, how those roads cross for you, and where you felt or found your sense of refuge. Because intersectionality for me actually identifies how we're not safe on one side or the other side. But when you realize that all of these roads are crossing, you find some type of refuge. Is that the same?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like so many people I know that, especially who have like minoritized identities, and I used the word minoritized because people are not minorities. It's systems that have minoritized folks. Um, but I find that most folks with minoritized identity, like, very rarely have one. uh, and and I think about that piece too of something that I think was just so painful to like witness and hear was in so much of the circles that I was running with, people were like, well, I either have to choose. I'm either like Black here or I'm queer here, but people don't see both, right? Or, yeah, I'm queer here, but also people don't know how to deal with like my neurodiversity or like a physical disability. And so like just listening to people consistently being like, well, which identity do I shrink so that I can enter this space to have this part of me seen? And that piece of like, we talk so frequently about how important authenticity is. And how can we be authentic when our full selves isn't being valued and appreciated, or like lifted up or believed? Oh. And so I think that the idea of like intersectionality for me was very much just from the work that I was getting to do and the collaborators that I had, was like recognizing that the shape shifting that they had to do was like more multidimensional than the stuff that I was having to do. Not that like it was great, but like it was different and more vast, right? Like it was more complicated. And so I think that that became something really important to me very early on.
The same thing for me. I talked to you about how important intersectionality was to me, even embracing myself as an advocate, because I, for so long, did not have the verbiage, right? To be able to truthfully express my experiences. And so when I learned about intersectionality, this term coined by a Black woman, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, it really helped me to identify my experience in a way that I had never before. So it was almost like a light bulb came on and was like, Mo, this is why you feel like you don't fit in anywhere. This is why you feel like you're always standing out. This is why you feel like you can't express yourself adequately. And it wasn't because of my lack of intellect or intelligence. It was just that society hadn't given me the tools. And so as my partner was taking a class, she's a minor in women and gender studies, I picked up her textbook, randomly flipped to a page one day. I like to read. And there goes Kimberly Crenshaw's term. And I mean, it was as if this was a line, right? I wasn't in the course, I wasn't in college. It was not supposed to happen. I was not supposed to be an advocate. I was supposed to be a rapper, believe it or not. But now I stand.
You could be both.
I I am a rapping poetic advocate. And so that is really the beauty of this term, right? Is that now I realize that at times I was not able to get adequate protection because I was a woman. At times, I was not able to get adequate protection because I was Black. At times, I was not able to get adequate protection because I was a lesbian. At times, I was not able to have adequate experiences or opportunities because I came from an underprivileged family and didn't have access to financial means. So, all of those things in the corporate environment were compounded. And as I tried to navigate that, I found it was it was actually not the best space for me to be in mentally. And I chose to start my own thing, as you are now doing your own thing. And so we are in that same boat, right? I was having a talk where I talked about us all being um, kind of in the water, trying to keep our heads above water, right? And a lot of times society tells us, right, that we just need to concentrate on helping ourselves stay afloat. That
Mhm.
ties back to the sense of individuality that you were talking about as one of your obstacles, or
Mhm.
isolating as one of your obstacles. And so for me, I just have now attached to this idea that not only am I able to keep myself afloat, but I can help other people to afloat.
Mhm.
And then we can all have a party on the river.
That's right. That's right. When I got together with
Cheers.
my partner, hey, I like that. Ooh. Uh, when I got together with my partner, I was like, I need to be clear that like no matter where we live, as long as we have a couch, if like somebody in community is having a hard time, like that couch is always there for them. Like I don't want anyone to experience being unhoused as much as I can help it. And like to that point too of I just keep thinking like what you're talking about of this thing around like how much brilliance and innovation do we miss out on as a society when we are not like recognizing and like listening and believing and lifting up people's full brilliance.
Yeah.
uh and I mean to your point, Mo, I feel like that like interconnectedness too of like the neighborhood that you were growing up in, right? And how that shapes about like, well, that probably affected transportation options, healthcare options, education options, right?
Yeah.
Housing, right? Like all the things. And so I think people think so frequently, they were like, well, they like break down the issue as if like criminal justice is one thing, courts, prisons, police. No, those are interconnected. They're
Right.
also connected to healthcare. They're also
Right.
connected to education. They're also connected to transportation. And this piece of like, we have to be able to connect the dots. And I feel like you sharing your story just connected that so well. Right. Of like just that piece of like, well, if you don't have access to resources, how do like stop talking about bootstraps when some people don't even get like what is that, dental floss,
Right.
uh you know uh,
Yes. I absolutely agree. And so that is what is so real to me because, I am friends with people. I know people from all different walks of life, but I also know this very real experience of having grown up in a housing project, of
mhm,
having grown up around people who were uneducated, who didn't have the opportunities or the family background that I had. And so those
mhm,
things live with me. And they are at the heart of all of my sense of advocacy and activism,
mhm,
but also up in this small town um, called New Bern, North Carolina, on the coast of North Carolina. I was able to see, right, like these, I'd just say the juxtaposition of it all.
mhm,
This town was very segregated, and went to the more the elementary schools, or the schools in the predominantly white areas of town. And
mhm,
because of that, I have the education that I have the exposure to people from all different walks of life that I have. But to even hear your story, where, there could have been a different trajectory for you
mhm,
also, even though
mhm.
you may not have been in that same underprivileged environment,
Yeah.
provides a sense of connectedness. And so I stand in solidarity with you, Casey, as you are with me. And we have just made an episode of the Speaking of Solidarity podcast. Yay! So, could I get you to tell us where we can find you on socials? Repeat that
Mhm.
website. How do we connect with Casey after this episode?
You can actually just find Casey Tunnelly on Facebook, or like it is BT with Casey on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn, and then my website is www.beyondthinkingwithcasey.com. And I just want to give a shout out to you, Mo, because I feel like you leaned in, you took a risk in like leaving a corporate environment at a time when we were in lockdown to start something new and powerful and more authentic. And I just am so grateful that like you took that risk and you are getting to live more of your truth and create space where we all get to feel a little bit more interconnected. So thank you so much for being who you are and doing what you do.
Wow, that means a lot. Thank you so much, Casey. Guys, tune in soon for a new episode, Another Amazing Human. Thank you again, Casey, and I'll see you guys next time.
All right. Bye.